And we are live. Welcome, mystery and thriller fans. I'm your on-air host, author Sara DiVello, and I am so excited to welcome tonight, live from California, All About Agatha podcast host and murder mystery author extraordinaire, Kemper Donovan, here to give us the inside scoop on his brand new book out now, The Busybody. Kemper, welcome to Mystery and Thriller Mavens. Tell us about this book.
Thank you so much for having me, Sara. I'm so thrilled to be here. So I am a huge murder mystery fan, and I actually have the data to back that up. I have the proof because I have been hosting a podcast all about Agatha Christie. It is in fact called All About Agatha, and it is dedicated to the one and only Queen of Crime, Dame Agatha Christie. I have been hosting that podcast for the last 7 years. Believe it or not. For the first 5 years, I actually co-hosted it. It started very much as a joint endeavor. It's something that I was doing with my good friend, Catherine Brobeck. She actually passed away at the end of 2021. So
I'm so sorry. I saw that.
Yes, thank you. So I have continued on for the last 2 years. I can't believe it's been 2 years already in her absence, and it's become more of a solo endeavor. But this book is very much a testament to Catherine, actually, and to her passion, because I never would have done this podcast without her. And it is, in fact, dedicated to Catherine Brobeck, because it was really while we were reading and reviewing and even ranking every single mystery novel that Agatha Christie wrote that I realized it was insane that I hadn't yet written a mystery novel, because I had published one novel before I started the podcast with Catherine. And even though it has some suspense and intrigue in it, it's not a straightforward mystery. And I realize now that I really just needed to write a mystery. I think even back then I wanted to write a mystery, but I was pushing against it for some reason. And The Busybody is a direct result of that realization that I had when I was hosting this podcast with Catherine and just delighting in the mystery genre and in Agatha Christie specifically.
Well, I can't wait to get into every delicious detail, and we have a lot to talk about, Kemper. We have a lot to talk about. We're going to get into every single titillating detail. First, I just want to welcome everyone. We are broadcasting live to 6 different destinations. So, hey, mystery and thriller loving friends, no matter where you're watching from, you're in the right place. This is the right time. It is Mystery Monday, and because Mondays can be murder, we're going to make them a little less painful for you and get your week off to a killer start. So, if you've been here before, you know the drill. And if you're new, welcome, friends. We're so happy to have you. Here's the drill. Every Monday, I give you my handpicked featured authors, and you get to ask them anything. So ask Kemper about this busybody, this sassy cover, his character, the unnamed ghostwriter who ends up teaming up with her subject, a political candidate who just lost a race for president, to investigate the murder of their next door neighbor, last seen in a wine store. So we have so much to talk about. If you've been here before, you know how to participate. Just get those questions going in the comments, and I will get the questions right over to Kemper. Let's jump in. Excuse me, Renee saying, hi, Kemper and Sara from Southeast Florida. I've been looking forward to this discussion. Yay, Renee, welcome.
Hello.
Robin saying, oh, I've been looking forward to this too. Hello. Hi.
Lots of good vibes in here. I love it.
Oh, good murderous vibes. Renee saying, it's so nice that you dedicated the book to her.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there was never any question of that. I mean, the other thing I will say is that I know a lot of people ask, well, how much Agatha Christie is in this book? Since, I've spent all these years now trawling through every single word that Agatha Christie wrote. And the answer is that there is a lot, although I just want to be clear that I never tried to imitate Agatha Christie's writing style, because that is not a game that I think goes well for any writer. You have to find your own voice. And Agatha Christie would never have wanted, I think she would have been horrified by that as well. But it really came down to a lot of the structural things that Christie does in her mysteries, and especially when she's constructing her puzzles, which she did better than anyone else. I tried to use a lot of those tricks and tropes that Catherine and I delighted in on the podcast, to the point where I think listeners, All About Agatha listeners, really have a leg up in solving the mystery. Like, it might be a little bit easier for them to solve it. And I wanted that. That was very much intentional. And there are just some shout outs to sort of recurring themes in Christie that we noted over the course of the podcast. And yeah, it's a Christie fest, but it is a book that does not read like a Christie book per se. It is written by someone who simply cannot get enough of Agatha Christie.
Reporting for duty, Christy fan here who just can't get enough. And I'm loving this conversation so far. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to get to every single one of these. Patricia, welcome to the conversation, saying, I love the podcast. Yay,
Oh,
Patricia.
thank you, Patricia.
Thanks for joining us. Renee says she loves the cover and she wants to know how you came up with it. So tell us the story of the cover.
Yes. Well, I am going to be totally honest here and take very little credit for this. Where's my camera? There we go. Take very little credit for this cover because my publisher spent a long time saying, okay, we're going, I gave them a couple of ideas. The main one was I kind of liked the Anthony Horowitz covers. I'm sure a lot of people who are listening / watching to this know about Anthony Horowitz. He wrote The Magpie Murders.
Every year. We've had him 5 times.
Oh my God. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, and he's like the best. I've had him on the podcast twice. He's like the best interview ever. He's such a charming guy.
Brilliant.
He's brilliant. So he has those 2 series, the Magpie Murder series, which there are 2 of them. And I think he's going to write a 3rd. And then also the Hawthorne series. But on his books, he often has like one object. So they're not busy. Like they're not particularly busy. And I said, I kind of like that. I like being able to focus on one thing. That's really the only direction I gave them. And then a couple of months later, my editor sent me this essentially and said, okay, we've gone through hundreds of iterations and here it is. I hope that you love it. Let me know what you think. And literally the only note that I had is that the Kemper and the Donovan were a little further apart. It wasn't even my note. It was my agent's note. Actually, I should be giving her the credit. They were a little further apart than they are now. We were like, could you just put those together a little bit more? Otherwise, all them. And I was so just impressed with what they did because I think it really stands out and it feels stylish and it's unique. And that's hard to do, I think, because there's so many books that come out. You realize that once you publish, you're like, oh my gosh, I am one among a sea here. And I think they really we came out with our best foot forward with this cover. So I've gotten so many great comments as I've started doing these events from people who love it. So I'm really happy to hear that.
Renee, I want to echo your comments. I loved this cover. I love the traditional pen shape of this, a fountain pen that
very writerly. Yes.
Ink is blood. There's this female form, dripping through the pen, everything about it. And it is, now that you say it, very Horowitz, like in the way of the Magpie Murders and, it's reminiscent, but different. So well done.
Yes.
Philip joining us from YouTube saying, probably way too early to ask, but will there be a sequel?
Yes, there will. There absolutely will be a sequel. In fact, I have already written it. This book was sold as the first in a 3-book series. So there will be 3 of these minimum. And I should note that I have my little innovation on the genre was to not take my detective and sidekick duo in this first book and place them into subsequent books. I'm taking only my ghostwriter sidekick character. So this is a sidekick series. It's perhaps born out of my overwhelming love for Hastings. I don't know. I actually don't even love Hastings that much, but I thought it would be really interesting to take a sidekick and pair her with different detectives, not only put her in different settings, but pair her with different detectives in each new book. It would just be a way to kind of put a fresh spin on the genre, but still retain that traditional sort of a structure. Again, I'm all about traditional structure and then putting a contemporary spin on it. So in the second book, there's no Dorothy Gibson character. That is my female politician who is the amateur detective within this book. And our ghostwriter character instead pairs up with someone else. And the entire book takes place on a boat. It is a literary cruise, which is meant to, in some ways, send up. I don't know if you're aware of this, Sara, but like these, you can go on, like, for example, a Gone Girl cruise down the Danube.
What?
Yeah. There was the Gone Girl cruise. I think that Cheryl Strayed has also done a cruise or two. And I know that Candace Bushnell, there was something like on the Seine in Paris that you could do a Sex and the City themed cruise. So these literary cruises it felt like another really fun backdrop for a murder mystery, since of course that's such a classic setting for a murder mystery. And that's my way of also building in homages to Death on the Nile and other, The Man in the Brown Suit, other Christie stories that take place on the water.
Thank you for the great question, Philip. Renee wants to know, could you please remind us when you hold your podcast? And thank you.
So the podcast comes out once every 2 weeks, and you can download it wherever you download podcasts. It's on all of the major platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify, but all of the smaller ones as well, to my knowledge. And yeah, so there was a ranking project that sort of formed the backbone of the podcast for the first couple of years, really for the first 6 years. And Catherine and I set about very systematically analyzing various aspects of each of Christie's novels and then comparing them to each other. So we actually came up with this master grid that ranks all 66 of Agatha Christie's novels, which is why I can say with authority that a good 2/3 of Christie's novels, I would say, are high functioning, if not brilliant mysteries. It's really only when you get to the bottom third that you start coming across titles where you're like, okay, this one's got some serious flaws. So, and obviously all of this is subjective. We knew that it would be fun to inject quote unquote objectivity into such a subjective exercise as reading. And that's why we have lots of fun arguments and dialogue with listeners, and we welcome that. But yeah, that formed sort of it wasn't the only thing that we did, but it was the main thing that we did for the first 5 to 6 years of the podcast. Now that that's over, at first, I think I probably would have told you at the beginning of the podcast, well, I guess that's it, and then we'll be done. But there's always something new in the world of Agatha Christie. I mean, there's always new adaptations, new continuation novels, new biographies, just new scholarship, because people are taking her seriously now in a way that they weren't before. And I have no plans to stop talking about Agatha Christie once every 2 weeks. So
Renee saying, wow, that is incredible. Absolutely. So I popped the link in here to just Apple, just as one place. So here is where everybody can listen. If you prefer Spotify, of course, just type in All About Agatha.
Yes, thank you for that. Yeah.
Here is the link. You can just click and subscribe right now, and you should click and subscribe. So here is that link, everybody. Okay, thank you for that great question, Renee, and thank you for that great question answer, Kemper. Philip wants to know, no spoilers, but I love the mixture of Agatha / other mysteries, pop culture, and the humanness of the characters. Let's talk about that, because the humanness is something that I also resonated with, Philip. Thank you for raising that, of both the unnamed ghostwriter and her insecurities and frailties and weird little idiosyncrasies, as well as Dorothy, her son Peter, Layla, her personal assistant, the hunky bodyguard, yum. So much to talk about. Talk about the humanity of creating these characters, Kemper.
Oh, the humanity. Yeah. The idea, the seed of an idea for the Busybody actually came out of an event that took place just a couple of weeks after the podcast started. So the podcast started in September of 2016. And weeks later, we had the presidential election of 2016, which, regardless of your political affiliation, we don't have to get into politics, was a doozy. That would be the Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump face-off of 2016. And there was this period right afterward where people were sort of wondering what Hillary Clinton was up to, because it was such a bizarre experience. It's just sort of like, what does one do after that? And something about the moment, in both a big and a small way, struck me as the perfect setting for a murder mystery. A big way because the country was going through something crazy and specific to that time. And then a small way in this character, this female politician who, had been running and had lost and then had retreated to her house and the woods around her house. And it was, all those photos everyone was taking of Hillary on walks in the woods. Like, there were a whole bunch of them. And I was just like, this is so bizarre. And I just, because I'm, murder mystery obsessed, I said, and that is where I'm setting my, this, if I actually do write this mystery, and it took me years, by the way, to get to the point where I actually then wrote the thing. I did not do it right away. I knew that that's where I wanted to set it. So a lot of the, there's a lot of issues, I'd say, of of gender bias that are sort of swirling around this story. And I obviously made the decision to have a female ghostwriter and this female politician who together are teaming up. They actually do have these foils. They're not that important to the story, but these male police officers who are working the official investigation and kind of provide some comedic relief and are also sort of the male foils to these two women, and also Dorothy's longtime personal aide slash confidant, who may or may not resemble Hillary Clinton's longtime personal aide slash confidant, Huma Abedin. This is a different character, Layla Mansour. In the story, she's a very important character. And there's just something about those, these women interacting and investigating and getting to the bottom of something in the wake of what they just went through and what the country just went through in this weird period between the election and the inauguration. And in the best tradition of writing a mystery, and this is where also I'll credit Agatha Christie with this, because she always did this and I want to do it as well. That is central to solving the mystery. The time that these characters are living in and their sort of political predilections and obsessions end up being very, very central to what is happening in the puzzle that the reader can solve with the clues that I'm laying down. So I wanted the puzzle and the sort of thematic preoccupations of the story to go hand in hand, because that's, I think, something that Christie does so well, and she doesn't get enough credit for it. But so many of her puzzles are character based. You solve the character and you solve the puzzle in Christie, or you get a true sense of what is going on and how these characters feel about each other and what really makes them tick. And that's how you really solve the puzzle. It's not necessarily, what time did the train come in? So I wanted to do that as well. And that really was yet another homage to Agatha Christie that I built into the book.
Philip, thank you for the great question. Kemper, thanks for the great answer. I want to pause here and let you guys know that the book is out now. And get ready. We can offer signed and personalized books, y'all. So this is very exciting. So Kemper is going to my partner in crime, pun intended, Murder by the Book in Houston. And therefore,
tomorrow.
That is how we can offer you signed and personalized books. So get your orders in tonight. And the good folks at Murder by the Book can ship anywhere, internationally, nationally, anywhere you live. So what does that mean? That means that Kemper can not only sign your book. Okay, let's just pause here and say, signed books are the best gift. Books are a great gift. Signed books are the best gift, but personalized books are even cooler. So that means you can ask Kemper to say, to my best friend, Sara, happy birthday to Agatha. You can have him say to Agatha's top fan, you can have him say, you're better than Agatha. You can have Kemper say anything you want. The possibilities are endless. And I always have authors say hilarious and completely untrue things. It's really fun, so that I have this collection of hilarious inscriptions. So how do you do that? In the comment section, right when you order your book, you can say, please have Kemper say whatever you want. Happy birthday to you. Happy Mother's Day to your mom. Whatever you want. Happy Mother's Day to you if you are a mom. Happy Mother's Day to you if you're not a mom, a dog mom, any kind of inscription. The sky is the limit. You just put it in the comment section. Kemper will write it, and the good folks at Murder by the Book will ship it to you. This is the coolest opportunity ever, and that's how we get it done, y'all. So wherever you're watching from, click and order, put that in the comment section, and it is yours. Okay.
I would be so excited if I'm literally flying into Houston tomorrow, and then if I can just like walk into Murder by the Book and there's just like a bunch of books and with like little personalized, like that would be a dream. And I know exactly what to write. That's half of having to personalize. You're like, ooh, what exactly am I going to write? As you're like sitting there and this person's looking you in the face. But this is I mean, I'd love if I see you, obviously, but this is eminently doable, and I would really, really love to be able to send along some personalized copies. That's great.
It's really fun. So I started this tradition when I met Jack Carr at Thriller Fest last year, and he was signing my book, and he said, what do you want me to say? And I said, write it to, quote, my best friend Sara, my inspiration. I owe it all to you. I went on and on and on. And then since then, I've just had authors get more and more outrageous. And I have this hilarious collection now. So don't miss out on this opportunity, y'all. It's really fun. Renee says, we love Anthony. Oh my God, we totally love Anthony. He's so charming. He's so brilliant. His brain is a well-oiled machine, and that accent doesn't hurt either.
It
Eric
doesn't
wants
hurt.
to know, when you write, Kemper, do you outline first? Yeah, let's take a peek at the process. Give us a skinny.
Sure. I mentioned that I had written a book before this mystery that wasn't a straightforward mystery, and I definitely did not outline that book. And that was my first book, so the process was very inefficient, and I really didn't know what I was doing for a while. Um, and I have to say, because I'm writing, and not every mystery is a puzzle mystery, also. So I think some books that fall under the mystery genre that might be more thrillers, or crime procedurals, they do follow a more linear pattern, as do books in other genres. So you don't necessarily have to outline the same way. But for a puzzle mystery that involves the laying in of clues that are used to clear up obfuscation so that the reader can arrive at a solution at the same time, or perhaps even before the fictional investigators do. If you haven't worked that out, I'm sure there are some crazy writers out there that are like, oh, I just freestyle that. It's fine. I'm sure that happens. That is not for me. So I had to fully outline this book. And actually, for the second book, so on the podcast, Catherine and I devised a system whereby we broke down each Christie puzzle in a certain way, in a certain pattern, and we talked about the world as it appeared to be, followed by a bridge of clues that take you into the world as it actually is. Very simple. But I have now taken to breaking down my own books that way before I start writing them. So I have a puzzle outline, which very closely resembles what Catherine and I did on the podcast. So any podcast listeners out there will know exactly what I'm talking about. So I do that. And then I do a regular plot outline, which is just chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, what I have in each chapter. And I make sure that the two of them, communicate with each other and make sense as a whole. So I really do a double outlining. And the joy and the beauty of that is that it actually is the opposite of constricting, because once I have that in place, it feels like then I can kind of experiment and have the freedom to do all of the little writerly things as to character and micro sentence structure, and also to change it if it's not working. I mean, sometimes in small or big ways, in a ton of small ways, but sometimes even on the second book, I had to change aspects of the puzzle, but I still had that scaffolding there. And luckily it never completely collapsed. I might have had to do a little bit of, spot alterations, but yeah, so the process is so different for a mystery versus at least the first book that I wrote. And I've found that though to be a boon to my writing and my efficiency.
A boon indeed. Renee saying, your editor did such an awesome job with that cover, Renee. I totally agree. Thank
Yes.
you.
Cannot be overstated.
It really can't.
Kensington Books, who are a fantastic publisher. They're one of the few independent publishers still left, and they really know mysteries. And you can tell that with that cover.
And actually, our guest last week, Edwin Hill, is also a Kensington author. We've had a
Really?
bunch of
Yeah.
Kensington authors, but two Kensingtons in a row this last week in this. David G joining us from YouTube wants to know, who are your favorite authors growing up? Good question, David.
Interesting. So definitely Agatha Christie. I mean, I read Christie starting around when I was 10, which I think is pretty common. I actually, to coincide with my book coming out, I wrote a piece recently for Crime Reads where I was talking about how I was reading Greek mythology, and I jumped directly from Greek mythology to Christie, which I don't think I could have explained at the time, but I think that Christie, she has the ability to write large, to sort of write in the similar way to how myths are created, with those sort of character types who you just find so relatable, and also to do that via accessible prose. It's this kind of adult fairy tale like quality that I think she has. So I just ate her up when I was in later elementary school. But actually, I have to say my big love, which is, and similar to Agatha Christie's love, Agatha Christie loved these authors as well, are the Victorians. I am a huge fan of Victorian literature. I grew up, loving my Brontes, my Dickens, my James, my Hardy. I also love Jane Austen, who's not a Victorian, but I love Austen as well. And yeah, and I think that's just, that's the heart of the traditional novel, and that traditional form of storytelling. And I think Christie used that and sort of built off of that and did her own thing with it. And I think for a lot of readers, that's kind of their sweet spot, or their happy place. Yeah, Catherine and I actually had a long-standing debate, or really we called it sort of like a cage match over whether you're a Wuthering Heights or a Jane Eyre fan. And it's kind of true. I think among a lot of literary people, there are like hardcore Wuthering Heights and hardcore Jane Eyre people. And she was Wuthering Heights, I was Jane Eyre. I will stand by Jane Eyre till the day I die. It's kind of like it's a book I reread very frequently, and also for its first person narrator, and having now written a book and writing several books with first person narrator, I'm very inspired by the power of that voice. And when she did that first person narration, it's not like it hadn't been done before. It certainly had, but the voice was a bit of an innovation, and it was shocking. Actually, it was
Mm,
shocking to people, and I take a lot of inspiration from that.
mm. Thank you for that great question, David G. Philip wants to know, he says, I love the sidekick theme, kind of inverting the usual pattern to be sure. Great point, Philip.
It's true, because often Christie very famously dispensed with her most famous detective sidekick. So her most famous detective is Poirot, and he was introduced by way of his sidekick Hastings, who wrote these first person accounts very much as Watson does for Holmes, because there's a lot of, I mean, you can tell in those early Christie's, The Mysterious Affair of Styles, I mean, in particular, her first novel, that she was very much inspired by Sherlock Holmes. It gets referenced. I mean, Holmes gets referenced all the time, and he feels very Watson like. But very quickly, she kind of, I think, diverted and did her own thing from what Arthur Conan Doyle was doing with Watson. And Hastings is quite honestly a bit dumber, and the portrayal of him is a little bit more sarcastic and ironic. There's not as much irony in the Holmes stories, and I think you can really see there a taste of modernism. It's Agatha Christie's spin on modernism. It's not Ezra Pound, it's not Virginia Woolf, but it is a piece of modernism within the detective genre. And I really love that, and I've always cherished Hastings because of that. But she got sick of him, and she turned to the third person for Poirot in the middle of her career, and she sent him packing to Argentina with his wife, who he meets in the second Poirot book, The Murder at the Links. And that always made me a little sad. I completely understand why she did it, but I love the idea of centering a series around a sidekick. And that was tricky, because then I had to make my sidekick someone who was, I think, believably interesting, believably smart, but also believably not hoodwinked, but misled, because you really do need that first person narrator. If that's how you're telling your mystery, they obviously can't figure it out right away, because if they did, there would be no mystery. You wouldn't be able to suspend things. So but that's fun. I've been having a lot of fun with that, with my unnamed narrator, who I also should just say that was partially an organic choice, because the narrator is a very withholding and enigmatic character, so it felt true to her not to name her. It just kind of happened as I was writing. I was like, I don't think she has a name, and I don't think she wants anyone to know her name. But I was also inspired by Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, which also features quite famously or infamously a nameless female first person narrator.
John joining us from Facebook saying, greetings from Northeast Ohio. Hey, John, welcome to
Hello.
the conversation.
Hi.
Margaret joining us from Portland, Oregon saying, wait, Danube, yes. Gone Girl Cruise, though, seems a little scary. I was thinking the same thing, Margaret, because guess what? I don't want to be the Gone Girl.
So
uh,
there was like a Slate piece about the Gone Girl cruise that's really funny, because I think it was on Slate. It was somewhere on the interwebs, and this writer went on the cruise, and the whole time was just sort of like, what is happening? Like, where are we? And apparently they barely even talked about Gone Girl, and at some point they had everyone get off the boat, and they took them into like some dungeon and showed them pictures of dead bodies or something, and she was like, why is this, what's happening? And Gillian Flynn was there, but like she didn't even really know what was happening. She was just sort of like getting a free cruise too. So it sounds like it was interesting. I don't know how many of those there are, but it is this phenomenon. It's kind of these literary experiences. Ellen Hildebrand also, like
oh,
you
yeah,
can
the
you can
Hilder
do the
Babe.
Ellen. Yeah. So I'm lovingly sending up. I what I like to do, and I think I did a similar thing with Dorothy Gibson, who is, by the way, I should say, not just based on Hillary Clinton. There's a lot of this Maine senator from the mid 20th century, Margaret Chase Smith, in there, who is a Republican and who
Susan
actually,
Collins.
yeah, Susan Collins is very much, I mean, she compares herself to Margaret Chase Smith. Like she's sort of the original Susan Collins because she was there forever, and she was very much about going across the aisle. And her big moment was it was called the Declaration of Conscience. She gave a fiery denunciation of McCarthyism on the floor of the Senate. She was a really fascinating and I think admirable person. And that's why I made my senator character who has just lost this election. She's an independent and she's a former senator from Maine. So that's why I set the book in Maine. And I'd also been to Maine a couple of times. I grew up in the New York area, and I'd been to Maine for summers when I was a child and had fond memories of it. And just that too, it seems like a great setting for a murder mystery with the snow and, cold weather and whatnot.
Renee wants to know, how did you get interested in Agatha in the first place? Did you always love reading her books?
I definitely I have no memory of what the first book was of Christie's that I read, but I definitely just started inhaling them around when I was 10 in no specific order. I think probably just whatever my local community library had on the shelves. And I think, like I said, I was really drawn into that adult fairy tale like quality, I think, at first, and their readability. I mean, it was some of the first adult literature that I read. And I think I was just, really fascinated by it and the mystery. I had already been a mystery fan because I had read Hardy Boys. We were very gender bifurcated back then, and it's like the girls read their Nancy Drews and the boys read their Hardy Boys. And I don't want to, criticize Hardy Boys too much, but I definitely was a lot more obsessed with Agatha Christie once I got to Agatha Christie. I think that I needed to use that as a stepping stone. And yeah, I mean, I really did always love her. I do think that because so many people come across Christie when they're young, sometimes there's a misapprehension as to the kind of writer she is. I think still, and this is why I'm such a passionate advocate of Christie, both on the podcast and as a writer. I think some people think that she came up with clever puzzles, but that she couldn't write character, that her writing style is schoolgirlish. That was what one of her critics said during her lifetime. And it's just not the case. I think if you go back to Christie and you read it, her prose is clear and simple and straightforward, but that's really hard to do. I mean, I struggle with that. Like she's actually an amazing stylist, and her pacing is impeccable. And the way that she can even conjure a physical setting sometimes or describe a character, the economy with which she does that is just masterful. And there aren't a lot of people who write like her. So yeah, I'm just out here sort of evangelizing for Agatha Christie, for those who might still think like, oh yeah, she's popular, but she's not that great. It's amazing how much you still come across that opinion, but it's definitely changing. I mean, that's why there's Agatha Christie scholarship out there. And I think people are realizing that there's a reason she's literally the best-selling novelist of all time.
Great points, Kemper. Renee has a follow-up question. Do you believe that Agatha thought that she would be popular for the ages? And actually, Renee, you're raising a really interesting point, because in the course of my research for my book, which takes place in 1923, Agatha was actually not the best-selling author in the world. That was a crown, a title that was held by Mary Roberts Rinehart, who was an American writer who outpaced her. So Agatha was known as the Mary Roberts Rinehart of England. And interestingly, for those who've read Broadway Butterfly, Mary Roberts Rinehart stayed with E.T. Stotesbury and his wife, which of course are my real life characters and the parents of one of my main characters, in their house, White Marsh Hall. And you can see photos of that real life property on my website, the behind the scenes page. Now, what is interesting and what there's a lot of speculation about is, why has Agatha Christie outpaced Mary Roberts Rinehart when you look at it now? Because of course nobody knows who Mary Roberts Rinehart is, or most people don't know. And one of the theories is that Mary Roberts Rinehart didn't write series. She wrote I think 3 books starring her nurse character, but Agatha of course had Poirot, had Miss Marple, and Mary Roberts Rinehart didn't. She wrote a series of standalones. Kemper, weigh in. What are your thoughts on that? And also additional thoughts you may have to Renee's question.
Yeah. I don't think that Agatha Christie realized how popular she would be. I think she would be absolutely astounded. She was very modest. I mean, she was born in 1890, so she, was a girl in the Victorian age, and then became a woman in the Edwardian age. And she really brought those sensibilities to the way that she would talk about her work or not talk about her work. I mean, she quite famously wrote I have it here actually, a 500-page autobiography here. It doesn't look, I guess, that thick, but believe me, it's long. And she talks about her childhood and I mean, it's fascinating. It's actually, if pushed, I say it's my favorite Christie. It's my favorite Christie book, because it's so interesting. She talks about her writing like this much in the book. She barely talks about her craft. And that's how she always was. She didn't like to talk about it. And she was just very self-deprecating. So I think that she, certainly in a public way, if anyone were to ask her, now, she would be like, oh my God. But I think also truly she did not have, these thoughts of grandeur about her career. She even there was a character who she created to be sort of her fictional alter ego. It was the mystery novelist Ariadne Oliver, and she appears especially in a lot of later career Christies. And I believe it's in the book Elephants Can Remember. She has Ariadne Oliver go on this extended monologue, an internal monologue about how people write her and say things like, I think you're just the greatest person ever to live. And I'm obsessed with you. And she's like, what? All I do is write detective stories that people for some reason seem to like my writing style works. That's it. So she really, I think she would be absolutely horrified. Probably. I think she would just be like, oh my God, why is everyone still, because it's growing, it keeps on growing, that we're still making all these movies. Not horrified, but just very, very surprised. And I think in terms of the question as to why has she stood the test of time, and not just Mary Roberts Rinehart, right? I mean, John Dixon Carr, even Dorothy Sayers, who's still very, very successful, very well remembered, but no one compares in sales to Agatha Christie. And there were so many other writers around that time. Anthony Barclay, the list, just G.K. Chesterton, the list goes on and on and on. There were so many people writing during that golden age. And I think it's a few things. I mean, I think the way that her character-based puzzles, I think it's not just, there are other people who did clever mechanical puzzles, but her character-based puzzles are like no one else's. And I think when she was at her best, there was no one who could compete with her. I think that the readability is really, there are very few writers who are as readable as Agatha Christie. And I think that also makes her translatable in a way that some writers are not as easily translatable, because a lot of people read Christie in other languages as well. I mean, she's had over 2 billion sales, and I believe half of those are in other languages than English. So, and she's brilliant. She's an amazing writer. I talk about this a little bit in that Crime Reads article, but there is a little bit of snobbery and potentially even misogyny in the way. But this is not from your question, Sarah. This is from the question of when people say, like, why is she, like, why, like, what's her secret? What's Christie's secret? And it's like, we don't ask that about, F. Scott Fitzgerald and Raymond Chandler. We don't ask why they're still read, because they're male writers. And when they were writing, most of their readers were at least perceived to be men, even though they probably weren't. And, that it's like, everyone thinks like, well, there must be some trick, because she was a woman who was writing in a genre that was, from the get-go, very much appreciated by other women. And it's like, there's no trick. She's a genius, and she's a great writer, and her books are great. And that's it,
Oh my God, I am loving this conversation. Thank you for that tasty question that set us off on this fascinating
that tangent.
topic of conversation. Margaret saying, interesting insight into Christie, the character piece. Agree. Renee wants to clarify, you will be at the store tomorrow?
Yes, I will be at Murder by the Book tomorrow. I should have the time in front of me, but I don't. But I believe that it's at 7 p.m.
So that means you got to get your orders in tonight, y'all, if you want that personalized signed copy. So here again is that link to order tonight, in
Tonight.
the next 23 hours, so that you can get your signed and personalized copy. This is a rare and delicious opportunity. So here is that link, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube. Get your
Oh,
orders
and it's, you know what? It's
in the next
6:30
day.
p.m. It's actually
Okay,
at 6:30 p.m. tomorrow in order to
22
buy the book.
hours.
I'm
22
glad that I
hours.
checked.
I'm glad you checked, because we only have 22 hours, not 23. So get those orders in. Now, Kemper, I could talk to you all night, and I think we need to do like a 24-hour Agatha-a-thon.
Oh, an agathon. Oh my
An
God. Yes.
agathon! Oh my God, an
Agathon.
agathon. I'm here
There we
for
go.
it. But we are running out of time, and we have so many
Okay.
questions. So we're going to enter the speed round now, the
Okay.
lightning round.
I will try to not pontificate and go
But
on
I
for
am
each
here
question.
I'm here for the pontification, but what we're all about here in Mystery and Thriller Mavis is connecting people to their favorite
Yes.
authors and introducing them to their next favorite authors. And our focus is on our folks, and we're going to get to every single one of their questions.
Yes, we will.
So
Yes.
let us dive in. First of all, Renee wants to know, will you be visiting Southeast Florida? If so, when?
I don't have any specific plans. I will be, so I'm going to Houston, and then I'll be at Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona the day after that. So this week. And then I'm doing another event or two in Southern California, which is where I live. And then I'll be going to the East Coast. So I'll be doing some events in New York and Connecticut, and I believe Maine as well, potentially Massachusetts. As of now, I don't have anything sort of in the South, which makes me very sad. And I've already had to, I've registered the interest, and maybe for the second book, or who knows, but please know that I will get there as soon as I possibly can.
But until then, get your signed and personalized book here. So here
Yes.
again is that link, because that's available to everyone, and the good folks at Murder by the Book will ship it to you tomorrow. So get it going. If Kemper's not coming to your city, he can still come to your city in the mail.
Exactly.
Okay, let's see. Oh my goodness, we have so many questions. We're going to get to all of them. Okay. Robin saying she is going to steal my idea for asking for wild inscriptions. Okay, perfect. I just posted it.
Please
I just posted
do.
the link. Make it as wild as possible. Oh my God, who can ask Kemper for the wildest inscription ever? Then post it and tag Kemper, tag me, and we will reshare it. This could be really fun. Diane joining us from YouTube saying, good evening, Sara and Kemper. I cannot wait to start reading this. Diane, you're in the right place. Melissa joining us from Australia saying, hi, Sara and Kemper. I love seeing you live today. Yay. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome,
Such nice comments.
Margaret saying she's team Jane Eyre for the win. Fight me, Margaret. Fight me. She says you pass inspection, Kemper. Marilyn joining us from Facebook says she's never seen texting in a book before as part of the character's communication. And for some reason, she was amazed to see that in the Busybody. Kemper, on your creative choice to do that?
Yeah, I texts are how so many of us communicate nowadays. So I wanted this to be very contemporary and reflective of the way that, we interact. And I think they did a great job in the book. It's very simple. It's just a very simple sort of reformatting and italicizing. But yeah, I'm glad that resonated for you.
Liza wants to know, are there any detective or mystery shows on TV you like? Great question, Liza. Thank you.
Well, of course, I'm a huge fan of David Suchet and the Agatha Christie's Poirot series, which is, now done, ran from 1989 to 2013. I actually love any Agatha Christie adaptation. I'm never mad at changes. I'm really not. I've made the decision, and especially now, it's like everything's been adapted at least once. Well, not everything actually, but most things have. So when people go a little crazy, it's to be celebrated and discussed and criticized and critiqued. That's fine, but I'm never mad at its existence. I'm actually very happy. I'm thrilled by its existence. And then I have to say, Poker Face, which was created by Ryan Johnson, who is just his films Glass Onion and Knives Out, I'm just a huge fan of. And he is one of the biggest Agatha Christie fans out there. He is just an absolute Agatha Christie fanatic. And I didn't even know that, and I was already a fan of his. So I love everything that he does. So that's the TV show that springs to mind for me. But I do watch a lot of the, those series that are on BritBox. There are so many. But now it feels like I'm plugging BritBox, who actually did sponsor parts of my podcast. I promise I'm not. That was an organic thought. But yeah, there's so much out there. There's so many movies and TV shows. It's so great.
Margaret saying, I love Dot as a sidekick in the Phryne Fisher mystery series. Smart gumption, but completely different world experience. Plays off well, totally. Plus, it's set in the 20s. That's always sexy. Um, she says she is ready to set up a Scottish field trip as a literary travel guard. Don't you believe any different? Oh, I'd sign up, Margaret. Let us
Yeah,
know. I mean, that would be so fun. Or to recreate Orient Express, train trips, or sailboat rides. Um,
absolutely.
Andrea saying that is so impressive. I read all the Nancy Drew books at that age. Same, Andrea, and then I reread them because I ran out of them. Renee says, this is all just so fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing, Kemper. I know I am loving this conversation. Renee wants to know, did you study politics, writing, or dot, 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 dot?
I certainly did not study politics, but my husband is actually a huge political junkie, and I think he's rubbed
Mm,
off on me at this point. We've been married for like 14 years, so he wore me down. Because sometimes just like, oh God, more politics.
yeah.
But I went to law school, and I actually learned a lot about writing at law
Mm.
school, even though I never really practiced for a day of my life. So oddly, I never did any sort of formalized creative writing. I don't have an MFA or anything like that, but law school was helpful for that. And then before I became a writer, I was actually a manager for screenwriters and directors, but mainly screenwriters in Hollywood. That's why I still live in Los Angeles. And that too was a really interesting to get these different views of what writing can do and how it can be effective. I think kind of helps you as you're sitting down to write a story, even though it's not actual, practical training for whatever genre or even just whatever medium that you're writing in. So I think all of those things contributed.
Robin saying, Kemper, take a moment to research Barbara Jordan, a young Black woman, a Texas representative from Houston under LBJ's presidency, a phenomenal woman who is buried in the Texas State Cemetery on her own merit, not as the wife or mother of a governor. She's buried between two Confederate generals. Fascinating. Thank you, Robin.
That is really, really interesting. And yes, I mean, that brings up just a real quick, because I didn't mention, the politician Dorothy Gibson in my book. She becomes a politician by way of widow's mandate, which is sort of this phenomenon early in the 20th century when a male politician would die and his wife would be called on to finish out his term until a suitable replacement could be found, i.e., male. But a lot of these women refused to go away, and then they started, and that is how Margaret Chase Smith became a senator. So that sounds like a really fascinating politician. There's always more to learn. That's also another one of my mottos. Thank you for that.
And I think too, we're having a moment where her story is finally starting to peek out from behind history. And there's a
Hmm.
lot of, really incredible female stories that have been buried or hidden or forgotten or subjugated. And I'm loving seeing this cultural moment of having those stories flow forth. Renee saying, yes, a woman author back then. So incredible. Exactly. Exactly. I'm just making sure. Margaret saying some of the humor of those others you mentioned doesn't hold up. Interesting. Kemper,
Some of the
you're replying.
humor of
I
of
think the other
which
authors, perhaps.
others. Oh, yes. Well, I mean, there are obviously, that's the other tricky thing, or not even tricky, but just important thing when you're talking about authors writing over 100 years ago, right? I mean, Agatha Christie's first book was published in 1920. One of the things that we also grappled with on the podcast, we eventually landed on depictions stuck in their time. That's what we call these issues,
Mm,
when aspects of personal identity, race, gender, sexual orientation, ability, things like that. When there would be passages, or sometimes even just sentences or words, where you'd be like, oh, this feels jarring in a way that probably wasn't intended, but the book was written in another time. And we always dealt with those by, we would actually have deductions for depictions stuck in their time. And it was never to judge Agatha Christie, because we should all be so lucky to have written something, and 120 years from now, someone is judging it and saying, wow, this seems so old fashioned and wrongheaded. I mean, my God, she, overall, I think acquits herself quite well when it comes to these issues, but they're really important. And it's important to acknowledge what it's like to read these books and come across those harmful and hurtful words and passages, or humor sometimes gone awry, all the problematized stuff. Oh, and I see this coming in. Yes, the problematic pieces of the era. We do absolutely address that. And I think it's really important. And we even at one of my favorite episodes of the podcast, we had people call in and leave messages that we were able to play about how they negotiate those issues when they're reading Christie. And it was a great way to, get someone else's viewpoint other than me, because I have my
Mm,
own identity and that
mm.
has its limitations on it. And we were able to hear from so many different people around the world. And yet we all still love Agatha Christie. I mean, that's the great thing. It's like we're being real, we're criticizing, we're calling out some of these problematic aspects, but we're also still reading the books and discussing it. So
Philip wants to know favorite book, Agatha Christie or otherwise.
ooh, I mean, our top ranked Agatha Christie is Five Little Pigs, which is a little bit of a surprise. It was tied with And Then There Were None, which is the one I think most people would point to. But Five Little Pigs is truly, I don't know if I would call it my favorite Agatha Christie, but I think it's the best Agatha Christie. I already name checked Jane Eyre. I have to say Jane Eyre is absolutely one of my favorite books. You know, and maybe a Jane Austen. I don't know. It's so hard because you have it's is it books with most affection, books that you have sort of like that emotional connection to, or just the books that you think are the best. I could probably pick like 50 books all and then make arguments for why each of them is my quote unquote favorite book. But I suppose I'll let that stand since I just mentioned a couple of titles.
Patricia wants to know, what are you reading now?
What am I reading now? You know what I actually just finished? I just finished The Fraud by Zadie Smith, which came
Ooh.
out just this past year. And I really loved it because my love of Victorian literature came into play there. I mean, Zadie Smith is someone who can write a Victorian novel like no other, even though she too is such a contemporary author. And not only did she write a Victorian Dickensian novel, but Dickens is a character in the novel. He's a secondary character in the novel. And the novel, in an oblique way, is very much about the political moment that we have been going through, I think, in the US and that the world has been going through to a certain extent for the last 10-ish years, but never by talking about it directly. I mean, this whole thing takes place in the late 19th century, and it's all about the Tichborne claimant, which is actually something that Josephine Tay wrote a book about. Speaking of another classic mystery author, she wrote a book about the Tichborne claimant, and so did Agatha Christie's older sister, Madge, and it became a play on the West End, which was one of the reasons that Christie felt competitive with her sister as to writing, and then went on to do what she did. So look at those connections. I could connect anything to Agatha Christie.
Margaret saying Zadie sounds really good. Renee says, so did you use sensitivity readers, Kemper?
I definitely was. I did not hire sensitivity editors, I would say, but when I get my reads on my books, I make sure that those sensitivity issues are flagged and kind of earmarked. So I feel like I get sensitivity reads, but I don't want to claim to hiring sensitivity editors. That I have not done. But the sensitivity, I mean, it's something that I think is important.
Rob is saying, LOL, the moving shadow behind Sara. Please don't say murder.
I was noticing that too.
I would love to say a really cool thing like, oh my God, I sensed a presence and I turned and there was no one there. But unfortunately, it was my husband, and he shall pay for that later. I told him not to come into my office while I was podcasting, and he's disobeyed and has angered the beast, the podcast beast. Oh my gosh, y'all, we could go on and on for, oh my God, Renee saying it's the gin. Renee, I was thinking it from our previous guest, Amina Akhtar, who wrote, of course, about these Southeast Asian cultural jinn, which are fairies, creatures neither good nor bad. She was on right before you, Kemper. Renee, I had that thought. Oh my goodness. You guys, we could talk to Kemper all night long, but we are way over time. So I just want to remind you that tonight you have 22 hours to order your signed and personalized book. So here again is that link. So grab your signed and personalized copy, tag me and Kemper in whatever hilarious thing you have him say. And that is a wrap for us on Mystery Monday. I hope we got your week off to a killer start. Kemper, thank you for joining us, and have an amazing time at the store tomorrow.
I had such a great time. This is the perfect thing to do tonight. What a great way to start the week.
Yay! Mystery Mondays. Getting your week off to a killer start. All right, y'all. That is a wrap for us. I will see you next week. I hope the days and the pages fly by until then.